today's webinar around mastering demand forecasting in a high-tech environment. I'm Dee Bowers, and I'll be your moderator. So before we jump in and begin, I'm just going to briefly go over how to use the webinar pane. So on the right side of your monitor, you should see an orange arrow. If you click that arrow, you'll be able to toggle the webinar pane between the open and closed position. You should also see a small chat window. Feel free to enter your questions in throughout the presentation. We'll answer those during our Q&A session as time allows. And that will be at the end of the webinar. And then now's a great time just to double check your audio settings. So if you've called in on your telephone, please make sure you've selected the Use Telephone option. If you're using your computer, please make sure you've selected the Use Mic and Speakers option. I also want to note that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to the slide deck and recording within 48 hours. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's presenters. First, we have Jeff Russell, Director of Industry at Armanino. Jeff brings over 10 years of experience working with Dynamics AX and has an extensive supply chain management background. I'm also pleased to introduce John Van Meter, Manager of our Dynamics practice. John brings over 12 years of experience working with clients on Microsoft Dynamics projects with a heavy focus on supply chain and distribution industries. So it's great to have you guys both here, and with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeff.
Thanks, Dee. The next half hour or so with you today, and in today's webinar we're really going to start off with I'm going to be presenting kind of the value proposition and the business case behind how demand forecasting is valuable to an organization such as yourself, and really kind of in the context of sales and operations planning, understanding how demand forecasting really can impact and help control decisions in other aspects of the business beyond perhaps the more traditional understanding. And then from there we're going to transition over to John, who's going to actually walk us through kind of the meat and potatoes of today's webinar. We're going to be going over the capabilities on generating a statistical forecast directly in AX, as well as looking at forecast visualization and reviewing and modifying that forecast using Excel. And then we'll conclude with reviewing forecast accuracy through KPIs, and ultimately a Q&A session at the conclusion of the webinar. All right, so I want to kind of start talking a little bit first about the essential value that a company can get out of a demand forecasting capability. And from a traditional importance standpoint, at a fundamental level, demand forecasting tells the business things like, what do I need, when do I need it, whether I have it in inventory, whether I need to buy it or produce it. Essentially, it's what do I anticipate I'll be delivering into my market. But the reality is that demand forecasting is so much more than that. It's really the linchpin to the rest of the business. And in today's highly competitive market, companies almost always need to deliver high-quality goods in a very short time frame. So almost every decision in the business in some way can really relate back to demand forecasting. So from a human resources perspective, staffing levels in the company that are needed to support the business, perhaps hiring and training programs to support those staffing levels, looking at engineering, really things like the investment that can be redirected to R&D for future generation products. On the supply chain side, elements like the ability to leverage economies of scale and produce larger quantities, ability to take advantage of reduced material pricing with larger quantity commitments to your vendors or suppliers, and then even things like the influence or the negotiating strength that you'll have with a subcontractor for capacity or expedites based on volume. And then also on the distribution side, there could be geographical considerations that need to be made for either storage or distribution of your finished goods and where you want them available to be shipped. And then also what standard lead times you might promise or provide to your customers in the marketplace. And then lastly, of course, a financial consideration around things like, do I need to increase the credit or the buying power that I have to support the business? Can we improve overall operating margin by reducing excess and obsolescent inventories? Things of that nature. So at the end, the evolution of ERP systems and planning capabilities in place today really allows businesses to more effectively analyze information and anticipate changes that are needed to support future demand. And historically, companies weren't really as empowered to leverage the information at their fingertips. But with powerful applications and ERP solutions like Dynamics AX 2012 companies really are empowered now to basically bring their sales and operations planning processes to a much more sophisticated level. And as a result, businesses are going to be more successful when they leverage these capabilities than businesses that do not do so. So the most revolutionary product, perfectly designed and brilliantly developed, may still be a failure if a company doesn't prepare for the demand that that product is going to have in the marketplace. So by utilizing demand planning as a key business driver and process in your organization, you can really ensure that you're going to maximize your successes and minimize your losses. So I hope that provides a good context to the importance of demand planning from a business perspective. And now I'd like to turn it over to John, who will walk us through the actual AX capabilities around demand forecasting, as well as with the hands-on demonstration itself.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. So just to give you guys a little bit of context for Dynamics AX, and just the general business flow of how the demand forecast fits into the overall big picture of MRP. So really, the forecast really precedes the actual demand. So it feeds into the actual demand and is generally consumed by it. And MRP looks at that and kind of calculates it and determines what needs to be purchased, what we call planned supply, as well as all the firm supply, the actual purchase orders or production orders that are already out there. So what we're going to be focusing on is really how do we determine that forecast. That forecast, the way that it's structured in terms of Dynamics AX 2012 R3, is we're able to take all of the historical actual demand and we can run it through a series of algorithms to come up with this baseline forecast. And this baseline forecast is using all this extrapolation to come up with an estimation or a guideline for the individual user to make decisions and to come up with a more accurate number. So how that all comes together is, and we'll show this in the demo today, is within Dynamics AX, that's where all your transactional detail lies. All of the date, the time, the product, the quantities, all of those historical sales are in your AX database. So we can run a routine to generate the statistical forecast using the tools and technologies that you guys are already using, Microsoft SQL Server, to establish that baseline forecast. And then for an end user to just have that simple way to access the data and edit it in just a very user-friendly, familiar tool, they can do that in Microsoft Excel. So once they've established those edits to the statistical forecast, they can publish them back into the cube, and then those changes can be imported back into Dynamics AX, which ultimately feeds the forecast, which is used in your MRP. So with that, I'll go through and begin the demo. So from within Dynamics AX, one of the things that we wanted to do is just show a little bit around the setup. So from a setup perspective, you're able to establish a series of forecast models. And these forecast models can be set up, for instance, you can have a current forecast. That's your operating forecast. You may also want to have an optimistic forecast or a pessimistic forecast, so different forecast models that you can use to run different reports and a different series of analysis. The other thing we can do is we can set up item allocation keys. And this is important because when we're doing a forecast, sometimes, for companies who have hundreds of items, for instance, and they don't want to, or even thousands of items, they don't want to forecast at the individual item level. They may want to only forecast at like a product family or a product grouping. They can set up an item allocation key that determines how the actual items within that family should get the demand allocated across them. So what we can do is choose from our available items and set up this grouping of our T products in this case. And what we've done is we've broken out how we want to split out that percentage of demand across them. And in here you can see that for this T04 product we have dimensional inventory, so different colors, black, brown, silver, and white for this television set. And even if we forecast at this top level T item, or we focus or we forecast at the product family level, which is all T products, we can allocate down to the individual detail automatically, and that's present in the cube. So that's just an important point. We'll see that in play as we go through the demo a little bit further here. The other thing, in standard AX, there had always been fixed periods, periods that can manage allocations according to a sales curve. And this is sort of a predicted manual sales curve. This isn't using historical demand or dynamically updated. So what we're going to show is how SQL Server can actually do the extrapolation and dynamically generate this on a product-specific basis rather than using the older model, which was using a manually derived curve. Okay, so to go into the master planning area, we also have a couple of important setups around the demand forecasting aspect of it. So from a demand forecasting, if we look at some of the parameters here, one of the key points is that when we do demand forecasting, we can set it up to forecast at a particular unit. In this case, we're forecasting at a unit of each. And this is important because sometimes we'll sell packages, in a 6-pack or a 24-pack of an item, but we really want to normalize the demand down to a constant unit so that it makes it easy for us to do our forecasting. We also can see that we have our cube set up, and the cubes that are being used for the demand forecast and the demand forecast accuracy, these ship with Dynamics AX 2012 R3. So when you do your initial installation, these are already set up for you. They're available out of the box. And you can also establish the path for the template that you're going to be using for the forecast interaction in Excel. So with that, you can see there's a couple of other important areas here. From a forecast generation strategy, we'll be using the SQL Server Analysis Services time series forecasting method. And this means we're able to utilize the power of SQL Server to generate these regressions. And so from that methodology, within this methodology, we really have two different models. We have ARIMA, which stands for Autoregressive Integrated Moving Average, and we have the ARTXP, and that's the Autoregressive Tree Cross Prediction. And really the difference there is from an ARIMA perspective, this tends to be more accurate for longer term planning because it is more of a moving average, whereas the cross prediction method, that's generally more applicable for shorter term planning or planning that requires a secondary or tertiary variable to look at. So a good example of when you might use a ARTXP would be you sell more umbrellas on rainy days, and you sell more bathing suits on hot days. So you want to look at weather as a different variable that's going to be considered in addition to your standard time series demand. So in this case, we'll just use the ARIMA for all product groups. We could also specify it down to the item allocation key level and determine a certain group of products can be utilized, one set of algorithms, and the other can use another. And so with those, we have a lot of controls around, how we're going to refine the level of accuracy, according to how it deals with our data, and we can test this, through backtesting methods. But things like periodicity and forecast values, splits, and variances, thresholds. So all of these, parameters are able to be configured to make sure that our predictions are as accurate as possible going forward. And then finally, from an outlier removal, there's always that one time where you had like an exceptional demand, maybe it's a fire sale of items, or another reason where you just want to exclude it from the forecast because that shouldn't be considered as you're doing your mean predictions. Okay, so from that, once you've set up your parameters, then we can just go in and generate our statistical baseline forecast. So again, this is a very simple process. We can set it up to have a start and an end horizon for looking at the historical demand. So this historical horizon is saying we want to consider all of the sales over this period of time, so from January to October. And then we're going to start our baseline forecast in November of 2012. And I've done this because of the demo data, the way that we have it configured in the system. That's where we have our historical information located. We can also determine how we're going to forecast, the level of, or the buckets in terms of the periods that we're going to be doing our forecast. So it can be monthly, weekly, or daily, depending on how you normally do your demand. In this case, we'll do monthly. And so you can see horizon of 12 months, and we have a freezing time fence of 1. So anything within that first month, meaning November, we're going to freeze that because it's too close to that period in time for us to make any edits to it at this stage. Let's begin doing our forecast editing in the subsequent month, which would be December. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set our item allocation keys that we're going to use in this worksheet for the L products and T products. We can certainly do it for others, but that's just through a simple query definition, which is a very familiar user interface for any user of the system. Okay, so as I generate this forecast, it takes about a minute, and this process, what it's doing is it's taking all those historical actuals within that period that we had discussed, and it's copying them over to the OLAP cube. And this OLAP cube is set up for the demand forecasting. It's separate from your transaction processing database, so that you're able to offload the resources to that OLAP cube. And then it's running those algorithms. So it's doing the ARIMA method of doing all the regression against the data with the integrated moving average in this case, and it's projecting the estimates into the future periods as a baseline. And what that does is it gives us this baseline, but the key with a baseline is that the users are always going to have more information than the system. The system only knows what happened in the past. It doesn't really know any outlying variables that might be out there, such as if there are any upcoming promotions or competitive insights, or maybe additional knowledge around the product life cycle. So once that's been generated, you can see that it has a notification here saying that it's been generated, and we can double click to just open directly to the forecast file. We could also save the forecast file on our SharePoint drive. But if we open up the Excel file here, what it did was it picked up the template that we use for our forecasting. And in this case, you have all the power of Excel. So within this format, you can see that we can, let me just move up our item allocation key. So you can see that we have the ability to look at both summary level view for our products, and we can look at individual products. So if I were to look at the November, remember this is locked for editing, that's in our time fence. If we take the future period and we say, what, for December we think we're going to sell more of the product T002. So we think that's going to be 500. We think you could see that the total quantity for the T products automatically updated. And let's say this is going to be 600, and that'll be 700. And you can see that that's updating right there. You can also see that if we were to want to change the allocation for a header level or an item allocation level, we can do that as well. So let's say 2400. And so in this case, we can normalize that down to single values. But what we've done is you can see that there is a little red triangle that's visible here. And what that means is that we have only made these changes in this worksheet. We haven't made the changes in the cube yet that's underlying the system. So we can work in this worksheet as much as we want and make changes to our overall forecast. And then when we're ready, we can publish them back in to AX. There's also a couple of other cool aspects of working in Excel that you get from this sort of a format and from the underlying cubes, and that is you're able to do all of the capabilities around things like slicers or visualizations. So if we wanted to look at our, our item allocation. We wanted to bring in our historical actuals, and maybe we want to look at those over the course of a month. You can see that the reason why we came up with that trend for our original forecast was we had an increase in demand over these couple, and we were running through that process using our arithmetic means or auto regressions there. So this allows you to see sort of the demand versus actual over time. All right, so let me go back to that other view that we had there, and you can also see that from an overall tool set, we can go through this OLAP tools to do our publishing. And if we go down from OLAP tools, what if analysis, and we publish our changes when we're happy with our edits, then those will be published right back into Dynamics AX, or right back into the cube. So that was a pretty quick and easy process. So just for reference here, we'll look at our T products, TO2. We'll look at our TO2, and you can see that we had 500, 600, and 700 here for our December, January, and February. So once we've done that, we can go through and do an import of the forecast. And again, this is a pretty simple routine of we can define what we're going to be doing our import of. We could also set it up as a batch, so set up this batch activity for our recurrence and have it automatically process. But let's just go ahead and bring in that import. And so as that imports, what it's doing is it's calling out to the SQL Server queue, and it's looking at all those changes that have been made, and it's going to bring in the edits. And what you notice is we had actually had 4 fields that we had made edits to, but there were 7 adjustments that were made, and that's because all of the cascading items, so we forecasted at the top level for one of them, and it cascaded down to all the underlying keys from the item allocation key down to the individual items. So now if we go into the product information management module, where we can look at the demand on our products, and we'll just apply a filter there to make it nice and simple. Our TO0002 was where we were making some of the changes to those, and we look at our demand forecast. You can see that we have our 500, 600, and 700 here now loaded into our demand forecast. So it makes it quick and easy and user-friendly for us to make these updates and edits, and now they can all be available to pick up in MRP. All right. So the other key aspect of it is now that you've made these changes, you may want to look at the demand forecast accuracy. So this is something that's useful in a couple of different ways. One is you can back test your algorithms and all your assumptions to see the demand forecast accuracy. So just as we're doing this back in the 2012 timeframe, you can do this at any point in time and just see how you can tweak some of the variables in those parameters that we had shown previously to make sure that it's more tailored for your type of products and your type of demand and your type of industry. So in this case, we can go through and generate this demand forecast, and it'll pop us into Excel. I already had it open to save us some time. And if it cooperates there. All right, so yeah, what it allows us to do is go ahead and generate this forecast accuracy tool. And so we've taken one of these products, and you can see that it looks at the historical demand quantity, the adjusted forecast. That means the manual forecast that was uploaded back into it, and then our error absolute and error percentage. And this is how I wanted to visualize it over time. So really a useful tool for anyone to understand that we were pretty accurate going into this time frame, and then as we made changes, maybe the demand didn't pick up as fast as we forecasted it would. This is the reduction in accuracy as we got to that point in time. It's also, in a cube, so we can make any of these adjustments and look down at a greater level of detail, and we can get down into year, month, date level of accuracy. So pretty useful in terms of all the capability that you get out of the application. Okay, so just to close out and summarize a little bit, what we had done was we had generated our forecast, we had distributed out the Excel sheet, and if you had multiple users, and in most real-world examples, you would have multiple users. Maybe a product manager is responsible for his product line, or one of your marketing managers maybe is focused specifically on a new product introduction. So individual users will get forecasts of their Excel sheets, and you can set those up as your directory on your SharePoint directory so that users can easily access their worksheet that they're working from. And they can quickly and easily change their part of the data and publish their changes back to the cube. And then on a periodic basis, we import the data back from the cube into Dynamics AX. So it's using all of the tools and technologies that as a Dynamics AX customer you already have, you own, and it's available to you today out of the box. So some of the real key lessons learned around this is first off, I think it's a really cool technology, and it's really powerful for what you get out of it, and it's fully integrated. It's free of charge. So it's something that ships directly with the product. It's included in the existing client access licensing, and it allows you to take advantage of it relatively quickly in terms of the deployment of it. We also discussed how it is based on historical demand. So there are some limitations with that, in that it only assumes that if you had data in the system previously, that we can bring that forward using algorithms. And we can also do a copy exact, which some customers also want. You don't necessarily need to use some sort of a regression model. You could just copy. If you sold 100 units in January and 100 units in February, when you copy that over to the new forecast, it would just say the exact quantity. But then, as we go down here from being able to modify the data in Excel, I think, as you saw in the demo there, it's just very familiar and easy to work with OLAP cubes. Anyone who has some familiarity with that, and many of our AX users, and certainly every planner out there that I've ever met knows how to use Excel. It uses just the existing tools that people are already comfortable with. And it does, utilize all the existing security as well. So any fields or data sets that a person doesn't, or shouldn't have visibility into, they wouldn't. Okay, so just to sum it up, in this webinar today, we had covered just the importance of demand forecasting for manufacturers. It has just huge implications on the entire business. And really getting the demand forecast right and putting the time and energy into making sure that it's as accurate as possible just has so many downstream impacts. So it's great that Microsoft provides some standard tools that can support your basic forecasting requirements. And then as you really look at real-world examples, because it is SQL Services based, it allows you to combine multiple data sources or legacy databases into that SQL database so that it can be picked up in your demand planning. And then from an innovation roadmap, I mean, this is Microsoft's strategy, is to use their own tools and to continue to invest in their own tools going forward. And there's just so much innovation that goes on an ongoing basis with Microsoft and the SQL team, the Office Tools group, as well as the Dynamics group. And you can be confident that they'll continue to build on this foundation. I think this is a first release of this capability. And it's very powerful and simple as it is, but there certainly is going to be a lot more to come. Okay, so with that, I'll pass it along to Dee.
Thanks, John. So we're going to open it up for questions right now. We've had a few come in, so we're going to get started with those. But if you have any more that you've encountered during the presentation, just send them over now. So the first one we have here is you showed that SQL Server Analysis Services were being used for the cube. Does that require any additional licensing?
That's a good question. So from SQL Server Analysis Services, that comes as part of your SQL Server shipment with your original purchase of SQL Server. So if you're using Microsoft Dynamics AX, by default, you already have it out of the box. You already own that license. So whether you have SQL Server Standard or SQL Server Enterprise, this capability will work with either version, and it does not require any additional licensing.
Okay, great. So the next one we have is we have several years of historical data in our legacy ERP database. Can this tool support that?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, it's all SQL Server based. So what we would need to do is to take your historical data and make sure that we formatted and structured that data in the same time series format of the cube. So there's going to be a bit of a custom effort to bring that data forward into the new data model, but it's absolutely something that can be done and often is done. So it's highly recommended that you do that.
Okay, and here's another one. How does the performance of this tool work in a production environment? For example, we have 20,000 SKUs.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so, in the example today, I had, probably a couple hundred, SKUs, maybe 1,000 SKUs in this demo database, and I used a subset of those. So you can see it took about, 45 seconds to a minute or so to generate that cube refresh for the initial demand planning, and then, to run those algorithms in the background. So from a performance standpoint, if you have an order of magnitude higher, 20,000 or 100,000 items, it will take more time. So it's something that you would schedule most likely as a batch job and run it, off hours. But it's hard to estimate an individual time for any company. But it's been tested on 1 million SKUs, and that took 4 hours. So it's something that could definitely be ran overnight and ready to go in the morning without any impact.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's our final question that we have that's come through. So with that, we're going to wrap up our Q&A session. If you happen to have any more specific questions that you think of after this webinar, please feel free to contact Jeff or John directly. We'll put their information here up on the PowerPoint. So if you want to just forward that, forward the slide, John, then people can take down your information and Jeff's information and send those questions directly to you. And then as you exit, there's a quick survey. If you could just take a moment and let us know how we're doing, we'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time today, and we hope you have a good afternoon.